But we'll go ahead and get started with some introductions of our panelists today. So to start off, I'm Dory Branch. I'm the Associate Director for the Bobcat Career Network in the Ohio University Alumni Association. And I just want to say welcome everyone to Setting Off on Your Own, Becoming Your Own Boss. We're super excited for this event. It's the final part of our New Year, New Career series. So Ohio University works to provide alumni with lifelong career support. And this is just one of our programs that is hoping to do that for all of you. So thank you for being here today. So we're always looking to hear from you, our alumni. So it's super excited to have you here and kind of get your feedback in real time. So if you have any questions or comments throughout the panel for our panelists, please put them in the chat. We'll try to grab them throughout, but most likely we'll save some time at the end so we can try and get to all of them. When you are submitting your questions, if you'll see a little blue drop-down menu, you can either select panelists if you just want our panelists to see it, or if you're open to other attendees seeing it, you can select panelists and attendees. Either way is fine. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists and we'll jump in and get started. So first we have Janet Makepeace. Janet is a 1993 graduate in interpersonal communications, and she is an executive coach and the CEO of JAR Leadership Coaching. Prior to starting her business, she spent more than 20 years in healthcare, primarily in the pharmaceutical sector. Her coaching experience spans of various sectors from healthcare to retail to a bunch of different associations. And she has a special interest in working with healthcare business leaders and individuals leading significant organizational transformation and those experiencing business or strategic challenges. So among many of those things or other activities include, she serves as a board chair for Appnovation, which is a full service digital consultancy. And she sits on the board of Citrine Angels, a women's angel investment group. So she is quite busy. She earned a certificate in leadership coaching from Georgetown University, and she also holds a master's in social work from the University of Cincinnati. Janet is also an avid runner. We also just learned she started biking recently, which is super exciting. And she lives in the Washington, D.C. metro area with her husband and son. So welcome, Janet. Thank you for being here. Next up, we have Jake Siegel. Jake is a 2003 graduate in industrial systems engineering and a 2005 master's degree graduate in the same thing. He is a co-founder of Tome. Is it Tome or Tomb, Jake? I guess I should have asked
Tome.
that.
Yep.
Tome. Okay, perfect. Co-founder of Tome in the Metro Detroit area. He founded that company in 2014. He is a third generation entrepreneur, and he sold his first company, Livio, to Ford Motor Company. So at Tome, he works to create organic partnerships with established companies and market leaders spanning a variety of industries. He's a proud supporter of Techstars and also sits on the Consumer Technology Association's board of industry leaders. So another busy person. We've got definitely our Bobcats in lots of different areas. So when he's not working to move the tech world forward, Jake and his wife, Abby, who is also a Bobcat, enjoy mountain biking, skiing, and cross-country mountain bike racing. So very active lifestyle over there too. Thank you for being here, Jake. And then next up, last but definitely not least, we have Dr. John M. Wetzel. So Dr. Wetzel is a 1982 graduate in chemistry and has served as principal of Wetzel Chemistry Consulting, LLC, since 2006. He manages process development and manufacturing for clients engaged in drug development, and he also has managed the development and manufacturing of parental, dermal, and oral clinical trial materials. Prior to that, he was the Director of Chemistry Support Services at Lundbeck Research USA, and also held positions of increasing responsibility, culminating in Director of the Department of Chemistry at Simtic Pharmaceutical Corporation. John, who has a visiting scientist at Suntory Institute of Bioorganic Research in Osaka, Japan, also holds a PhD in chemistry from Johns Hopkins University. He's an inventor on 21 issued U.S. patents and co-author of 26 peer-reviewed publications. And in his spare time, which I can't imagine there is a lot of, but in his spare time, John sings and plays guitar and harmonica in venues around the Athens, Ohio area. So entertaining us in lots of different ways around the area. So thank you for being here today, John.
Thank you.
Awesome. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into questions. We do have a few prepared for you all. Like I said today, if anyone has questions throughout the panel, please feel free to throw them into the chat and we'll definitely try to grab them along the way. For our first question, let's go ahead and get started with Janet. So Janet, our first question, and I'll give a chance for everyone to answer, but if you could kick us off, what motivated or moved you to become your own boss? Was this something that was like a long-term goal, or was there an event that was kind of the catalyst for you to become your own boss?
Good question. And it definitely wasn't a long-term goal. I spent 20 plus years in the healthcare industry and primarily in the pharmaceutical sector, running mostly commercial and running various businesses in the US and Asia and in Europe, and ended up back in the US to take a role with AstraZeneca, and did that for a couple of years and found that, I was always that leader that kind of went in to build something or take organizations through change. And always felt like people really, drove the business forward. I believe that it starts with people if you want business success. And I took the opportunity, my role got split. They wanted me to take a look at a role leaving the country again, and another role that I wasn't much interested in. So I made a bold decision at 45, and I had been looking at Georgetown University's program in leadership coaching. So I applied for the program, was accepted, and thought, I'm going to take some time, go back to school, be a better leader when I come out, and, maybe run a biotech or something smaller within the pharma biotech industry. And halfway through, I decided not to, and I decided to start my own company to do executive and team coaching. And I also pivoted into making more of an impact in supporting women entrepreneurs who were running their own businesses. So I made a big turn and didn't necessarily plan to, but really happy that I did. So that's been about 5 years ago.
I think that also speaks to being open to other opportunities. You never know where life is going to take you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's definitely been a theme for me. If I ever get the question, what do you want to do in 5 years? I kind of giggle at it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's just so many opportunities, and sometimes something comes across your plate that you might not have even thought about and you're a great fit for.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I believe in going for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Janet. Jake, what about you? What motivated you or moved you to become your own boss?
Well, I'm sure that between the three of us, Janet, John, and myself, we have a lot of similarities about what motivates entrepreneurs. I want to add to what Janet mentioned about what are you going to be in 5 years. One of the things that we ask people at our company is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And whether they're a co-op intern or they're a 30-year veteran. And the important part of it is the process and the journey. So for me and being an entrepreneur, it's about being in the pursuit of living the lifestyle that I want to live with my family and my friends. And as that's not something that as a 21-year-old I would have ever understood. So I couldn't expect that anyone that's younger is going to get that. But one thing I've kind of noticed is that as you get going through life, you realize time is the most valuable asset. And being your own boss, I mean, it's a little bit of it's a little bit hypocritical because we do have bosses. It's our customers, it's our family, it's our friends, and it's really around prioritization of where you're going to set your time up and how you manage it. But in the title of the presentation, I would say that it got to a certain point where I felt that the speed that I wanted to learn, it would only be met working in a small business that I was either a part of or running. So I either needed to join a startup or be in a startup. And the other thing that was really motivated me is I want to be around people smarter than me. And like that, I got into a big company culture where there was a lot of tension, a lot of politics, and that's pretty much every large corporation. And some people love that. And for me, it was around, I'm driven by being around really smart people that are really motivated and want to be the best versions of themselves. So that's why I chose to be my own boss.
That's awesome. I also think, so this is funny because we have Janet, Jake, and John, which isn't going to be confusing for me at all at any point throughout this hour. But I will say it's interesting too, because like you said, Jake, the commonalities that you all will have in common. And so far, both you and Janet have talked about people and the importance of people, right? So that's, I think, really powerful and says a lot too about why you do this. John, what about you? What inspired you? Was there a long-term goal, or was there an event that kind of pushed you to become your own boss?
So yesterday when I saw this question, I thought about fibbing my way through it, because I thought that, well, I don't know where this record of this discussion will end up, and do I really want to tell the truth? But I'm going to tell you the truth, which I usually do. But like many people in the pharmaceutical industry, I was laid off. So I worked for a startup company, and after about 13 years, we were acquired by a mid-size Danish company called Lundbeck. And a couple of years later, I got laid off, but within, and I haven't checked this for strict accuracy, but my understanding is basically they laid off most of the people certainly in the chemistry department, and I think in pretty much the whole organization. So anyway, I was so by mutual agreement, I left there. That's how it's reported at the time. Also, at the time, my mother had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I'm from the Athens area, and so I thought, well, I've got to figure out something different to do, and it would be good to go home and be near my mom and my dad. So I returned to Athens, and so what motivated me to become my own boss? On about the day that it was announced within the company that I was leaving, a freelance consultant that I had been working with there, that had been working with our company in helping us to make our first foray into drug development from the drug discovery area. He called me up and said, "Hey, I heard you're going to be leaving. Have you ever thought about consulting?" And my experience with interacting with consultants prior to that was usually the chemists had been beating our heads against some chemistry problem for several years, and we're getting frustrated. And so we'd find, maybe some Nobel laureate or some really smart professor to come in and see if they could advise us and help us find solutions to very difficult problems. But what I learned is there's a whole other world of consulting, which is you bring your practical knowledge of a given problem. You don't have to be the world's greatest genius in the area. You need to know what you're doing and be competent. So he said, you've learned as you went to help Synaptic, the company I was with, file our first IND, our first submission to the FDA to get permission, more or less, to start a phase 1 clinical trial. So he said, "You've seen how this works." And he's a toxicologist, so he helps lots of companies through this. He's done this with more than 100 companies, I think, by then. He said, and in my work, his work, I'm often asked, "Do you know anybody who can handle the chemistry part of this? So I could throw you some work if you decide to do this." And he gave me some advice about how to charge clients and what sort of contracts to use and things like that. So he was very, very helpful. So I gave that some thought. I also considered whether to forget about chemistry altogether. And I had this dream of opening a coffee shop where people could come in and there'd be guitars and instruments hanging on the wall, and you could get a cup of coffee, and maybe if you play music, you could pull something off the wall and play if you didn't bother the other clients too much. And so I was pondering these two activities, and I came to Athens and walked into Donkey Coffee and said, well, there's that idea. Somebody's already doing it. I mean, they don't have the instruments hanging on the wall, but more or less. eventually I got a call from a former colleague that said, "Hey, we've got a project. Would you like to do it as a consultant?" And so I said, "Well, gee, I could invest $200,000 into a very risky business and open a coffee shop, or I can just answer the phone and do what this person does and charge them by the hour with zero investment." So of course I ended up doing that. So by the way, thank you for inviting me to join us today. Long answer to your question.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, John. I also appreciate your honesty, right? Because we're all Bobcats here, all sharing that. So I appreciate that. And I think similar to Janet's idea, right, of, being open to the other opportunities, you never know who's in your network or who might need your extra support too. So what other opportunities they're going to provide. And you're obviously a great example of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So kind of similar question, just to kind of maybe dig into the weeds a little bit more about, actually creating your business. How did you get it going? Was it an extreme shift? Did it occur over time? Was it like, yep, today we're going to start? How did that kind of work for each of you? So maybe Jake, if you could start us off, how did you get your business going? How'd you start?
It's really about fit and timing, and when you know. So you have to be passionate about a problem to solve. I mean, that's the key part of this. So when we started, my business partner and I started our first company before we got into automotive technologies, which was later acquired by Ford. We started off working on consumer electronics, which is the industry that I came from, and audio products. At the time, people had XM satellite radio in the car. That was very popular. And this was right when the iPhone 1 came out. So it's 2007. We got contacted by a little company called Pandora. No one really knew who they were. And they were doing internet radio. And I thought that was fascinating. And as a former Athens Court Street DJ, I was pretty excited about sticking to music. And I heard the story about Pandora. And I said, that sounds cool. I'd love to build a desktop radio for the company, and I'll build it. You guys can help market it. And it was right when the recession started, and a lot of the bigger companies like the Sonys and Logitechs and Sonos of the world, Spotify didn't exist back then, for probably a lot of students that may not know that. So this was like the first foray. So it really is about timing and fit, and really the ability to execute. I saw a question that came in from Scott. Thanks for that question in the chat about like comfort level. And I want to just mention that, like, I took the plunge, and then I brought over my old boss, who became my business partner within a month. And entrepreneurs, we seek out uncomfortable. We seek out challenge, and everybody likes to say they seek out challenges, but we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, literally. So I stopped DJing in nightclubs when I was, I think, 24. I had to go back and do that again, and moonlight and figure it out. And that, it was not comfortable. And there was still smoke in the bars back then, and you smell terrible, and you get a headache in the morning. Even if you're not drinking, it sucked. But that's what you had to do. And that's still what you have to do to be successful. So you take the plunge, you go into that area where it is uncomfortable, but you do it because you care enough about the problem you're solving that you'll find a way to win. And entrepreneurs that are successful, all of us, we basically become what we think about, and we just focus on that until we win at it. And that's what you have to do. I mean, anyone that jumps into something kind of like halfway, I've never heard of someone that's been successful. The only thing probably in life you're ever going to be successful at is buying lottery tickets, doing that, in my opinion.
I appreciate that, Jake. That's definitely well said. And yes, thank you for hitting on that question too, because it is related. And I think it's also interesting too, because similar idea, entrepreneurs you're talking about, they are problem solving, finding whatever it is that they want to problem solve. And sometimes that includes problem solving. I don't have a lot of money right now. So what am I going to do to kind of patch that hole right now while I can, right? So thank you for talking through that with us a little bit. John, what about you? How did you kind of talked a little bit about how your business got started, you got approached, but what did that look like moving into this, and how has it become such a long-term thing for you? Because you started your business back in 2006, so it's been a while.
2006, yeah. address the, respond to the question that was posted here. It looks like maybe it's by Val Hunt Bierbauer, but, or Scott Murphy. It says, I think Val says she may be logged in as Scott. So whoever that asked that question, it's an excellent question. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sort of combine questions 2 and 3 to respond to that. So the question is, if you're doing freelance work, and that's what I'm doing, how do you deal with the highs and lows of contract work on your finances? And this question, the reason I'm talking about it right now is that it has to do with how you get going. So in order to do freelance work, and Jay kind of touched on it too, you need a way to survive until your business gets going. So lots of businesses fail. Startup businesses fail, and for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is it was a great idea, but the founder just couldn't hang in there long enough for the business to have time to succeed. So in my case, like I said, my first job came from a former colleague very shortly, while I was still trying to decide what I was going to do. But for the next 5 years, it was very thin. And the reason I was able to survive that was that at the time I left my old job in New Jersey, I sold a house in New Jersey at the peak of the housing market just before the recession hit. I got some severance from my former employer. And so those two things allowed me to survive and I had very little income for the next 3 years, and then it started picking up a little bit, and it was a good 5 years before I started to think, okay, maybe this is working. There was a day when the consultant I mentioned earlier called me up and said, "How's it going, John?" And I said, basically, I don't know, I don't have any work. And then he finally, after he had promised to do this 3 years earlier, he finally tossed me a job. Now I work for him quite a bit. So that's a very important thing for those who might be considering freelance work, that you need some way, whether it's a side job or you stay in your current job and do this on the side. And of course, you have to make sure you don't violate confidentiality agreements with your employer. Or otherwise annoy them too much. So it's tricky, and that is I think that's one of the reasons I can survive. There are thousands of very, very competent chemists out there that I would be competing with. The reason I'm not competing with all of them is they have house mortgages and they got to send kids to college and all that stuff. So they might consult for a few months in between jobs, and then they get scared and they go find a job. And so when somebody's looking for a consultant, there are only, a small number of us who actually do this full time in my field.
Yeah. I think so. It's a lot of patience and grit, and when it comes to that, but also I like what you said about too. I've known people who've worked with companies that have a non-compete clause, right? So you can't go out and do this work necessarily right away or do similar work. So how do you make that happen? And maybe Janet, you come from a different background where you were in school when you decided to kind of go through all of this. So, that was obviously your event, but how did you kind of get started coming out of school? How did you start building up your business?
Yeah, I can really relate to what both Jake and John said, and the question about finances. I made more money the last year I was in corporate America than I ever made in my career. And the year after, I made less than I ever made in my career. Even being out of grad school as a social worker the first year. So it was humbling. And I also could absorb that. So I planned for that. And I was able to do that. I think, to answer the question about how you got started, one of the things that I did was I knew what I was going to do at this level. And I started to try to figure out how I was going to be more intentional about exactly what problem was I going to be solving. And one of the ways I did that is I talked to as many people as I could. I took a step back and I started to really live into being that lifelong learner, which wasn't necessarily that easy. I mean, I was running a pretty big business globally for a multinational company, and then I go to run a business of my own and just start it. And I had to be humble enough to realize that I didn't know how to do this. So I had enough business knowledge to know that I needed to be strategic. You know, a lot of times when I talk to entrepreneurs, they're like, oh, I have a website. You know, you kind of go to these areas that you think are important to start a business. I tried to prevent myself from doing that and to think, okay, strategically, what do I have to look like within this year, within the year after, and within the year after? Gradually, one bite at a time, knowing that I was going towards a certain goal. So for me, it was learning from others and also trying to figure out strategically, where do I need to start and where do I need to be at these milestones? So that was helpful in my process.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think having that long-term scope or view, right? We're not looking at what's going to be next year. What's this going to look like? Even though we need to be adaptable, but the next 5 or 10 years, what needs to be to make it livable, achievable?
Yeah.
So kind of going along with that question, whether you are still facing some roadblocks or challenges today, or maybe some challenges to getting started, what have been some of the challenges or roadblocks that you've faced? How did you overcome them? So thinking about, was there someone or something that really helped you get over those roadblocks or challenges, something that you continue to use today? Maybe, John, do you want to start us off thinking about maybe what are
Sure.
some of those roadblocks that you faced?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge I faced was what I mentioned earlier, that business was very slow in the first few years. I might approach them differently now, knowing what I know now. What I did was I tried cold calling people. I mean, there's so much information available on the internet about people. For example, I found that law firms, some of what I do can relate to patent law. And startup pharmaceutical companies, they have websites that tell you who all the key management people are, or all the attorneys are, and you can find which attorneys specialize in chemistry, patent law, or whatever. So I found all these people and sort of made my own little database of them, and then tried sending them letters of introduction and then following with a phone call. I worked a little bit with somebody who coached me on that kind of stuff. What I learned from that is I'm absolutely terrible at especially at that time, at cold calling people. My voice would be shaking as I left these stupid overly slick voicemail messages, and nobody ever called me back. I mentioned my colleague who got me into this, called me one day and said, how's it going? And I said, well, it's slow. He said, well, when you get your 10th client, you'll find they start to circle back. The earlier ones will show up. And he said, basically, you need to have about 10 clients in order to have a sustainable business. Well, sure enough, I think I hit client number 9, and client number 1 or 2 called me up and said, hey, John, you still there? We got some more work for you. And that was when I knew that this was likely to work. And that probably took at least 3 years, maybe 5, to get to that point. The thing I would do now, so after trying various things to drum up business, one thing I found that worked was, so the consultant who got suggested I get started, he's a toxicologist, and so it's a complementary skill set. So what didn't work was for me to go to the American Chemical Society meeting, get into a big convention hall with 15,000 other chemists and try to sell them chemistry services. You stand there and you feel like an idiot. Why would these people want to buy chemistry services? What worked was to go to a meeting of toxicologists, many of whom work with startup companies that are trying to get their drug development going. And so somebody in that team has to do the chemistry part of it. So since I had gotten work through my friend Shane, who's a toxicologist, I thought, well, let me try to meet other toxicologists. And I went to a trade show. Initially, I went to a trade show and just had a booth, which is very expensive and didn't get anywhere. What worked was to go to the trade show of toxicologists, use LinkedIn to find people who are likely candidates, other consultants who might be able to bring me into their projects, send them each a message that, hey, I'm going to this meeting. If you happen to be going to this meeting, would you mind talking with me for a few minutes over coffee? And so some people didn't respond, but several did. I probably met 20 people and had little 20-minute appointments with them. Afterwards, I sent those people each a gift with my contact information on it. And this was another thing I learned. Initially, I would do a trade show and I'd hand out little, things that cost $2 with my, little flashlights and whatever, that have my contact information to anybody who would take one. This time I said, okay, I'm going to focus on these 20 people. I'm going to get them something very nice that is too nice to throw away, because that's probably what happened to all those flashlights. And so I got them a nice Yeti insulated coffee mug with my logo on it, and mailed it to them afterwards with a thank you note. And just a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from one of these people, years after we had met. And he says, hey, this is Joe. And I'm like, who? And he says, you sent me a coffee mug. And oh, yeah, okay. So, and he wanted, and I've gotten some work through some of those contacts. So for those trying to drum up business, think about those things. Give people something that they don't want to throw away with your name on it, and find complementary skill sets, because those people may already have work, but they need some help to build up the team. And don't bother trying to sell your skills to people who already have the same skills.
I love that. I love intentional outreach to people who need your skill set, right? Like that's great advice. Thank you, John. That's awesome.
Sure.
Janet, what about you? What are some roadblocks that you faced? How did you overcome them?
My roadblocks have been a little bit different, and maybe it's because I switched like I switched, but my biggest roadblock, and especially beginning, and I still consider myself a beginner 5 years in, was more around leaving my old role and my old title. So even a couple years in, I would say at a couple years is when I stopped doing it, I would introduce myself, my little elevator pitch, and I'd go back to what I had done in the past. Because I was successful at it and I felt comfortable with it. So mine was more of a mental roadblock about, now I am running a company, I am scaling a company, I'm building a business, and that's what I do today. So that was probably the biggest one for me to get through. And then the most impactful conversation during that process for me, I was talking to a woman who I knew who was a coach and had a really successful consulting and coaching business, did a lot in pharma. I knew her as a leader in pharma. I met up with her for just like a glass of wine, and I said, hey, give me some advice. What was the best advice that you received when you started doing this? And she said to me, and I've heard this word a few times already, she said, you need to be intentional about what you do. So, I'm not a coach, and I coach everybody, and I do everything, and I train, and I do all of this stuff, but what is it that you're going to be providing? Because when you're so broad and you're not intentional about the service that you're providing, it's really hard to let other people know what you do, and then also to put your efforts and your focus in the right areas. So that was a big turning point for me. Even though it was a little conversation, it stuck with me.
It's like knowing your brand in a way.
Absolutely.
And I want to go back really quickly, Janet, to something you said, because, you're talking about that mental adjustment that you had to make. I think we do think a lot about roadblocks as like other people or obstacles or institutions that might be in our way, but there are some of those mental components to some of this, right? can I ask, how did you, or what helped you kind of, you said you took some time to get over that hump. But was there anything that was kind of a catalyst for it, or was it just time of feeling more confident in your work? What really helped that?
Oh, I think that conversation I had about intentionality.
Yeah.
And the whole process of going broad and then, talking to people and then figuring out what I like to do, what I was good at doing. I did not launch my company out to I have a pretty big network, and I didn't launch out for almost a year because I didn't have the answer to that yet. And as I found the answer to what I wanted the company to look like and finally launched out, that's when I started letting go of what I had before, because I had something to move forward.
Yeah.
So it was a turning point probably that year in.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. And Jake, what about you? What are some roadblocks that maybe you face? I know that you've had 2 different companies. So you've maybe they've been similar, maybe they've been different, but how did you overcome some of the roadblocks in your way?
First, I got to go back and give John and Jan a little kudos. I wrote down need to up my swag game. So I'm going to go like full on Yeti coffee mugs. We're in separate industries, so I don't think anyone will get dual mugs, but that's brilliant. Jen, comment about like being intentional, even just got me thinking about it. I'm like, I got sucked in as a participant in this call now. I think that's like a foundation of being successful. And when you start hitting roadblocks and you can describe, there's a sentence that they coach entrepreneurs, or at least they used to, and they say, unlike X, Y, and Z competitors, we do this. So if you can't say that sentence, then no one's going to buy what you're selling, whether it's a product or a service. And there are so many companies that do generic services or generic products that, unless you're one of the large organizations, you're just not going to win. So you got to find out. So back to my earlier example is, unlike other connected internet radio companies, we were the only one that had Pandora on the front of the box with the Pandora thumbs up and thumbs down logos. We're the only one that your grandparents can use without calling you for help. That's the, and by the way, that's a little bit of my QVC HSN training kicking in there. Like Janet said about my old job when I was hawking stuff on air, different story. But yeah, I'd say that's kind of the roadblock, is like, you gotta understand what makes that unique, and it gets better with time, and when John was talking about leaving voicemails, and there's an old movie with Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn called Swingers, and this guy like leaves this terrible voicemail for this woman he met at the bar, and it's like one of the most cringeworthy scenes. And I can tell you, I felt that way. I still feel that way sometimes, where I'm leaving some voicemails or even emails or sending someone a text where I just know it's not going to come back, but I just like to continue that follow through with folks. So that's another roadblock, is just making sure that you're targeting well. And the biggest mistake I made and I didn't realize this until later in my career, is when I started raising money for my company and looking for partners, we went way too wide. And I wasted so much time driving to cities, and there wasn't technology like this back then. It was like jumping through so many hoops for people that I should have known better, and someone should have advised me. So I could probably talk about this for hours, but I'll leave it at that. I know we've got a tight agenda for today.
No, I appreciate that though, because I do think there's a lot that you don't know until you know, right? Like hindsight is 20/20 and all of this. So that's why we have you all here, is you guys have those experiences to share with all of our attendees. A reminder to all of our attendees, if you do have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We have a few more questions for our panelists, but I want to make sure that your questions get answered first. So we might skip around a little bit here. So please go ahead and put those in there if you have any. And then for our panelists, I'm actually going to combine a little bit of 2 questions here. So I'll start with you, Janet, but 2 questions that I think are really important that I want to make sure we get to. I know the hour is going to be up before we know it. Can you talk a little bit about how you stay up to date on current trends that are in your industry, or, how do you keep on your toes, continue to strive and be the best business that you want to be? And then maybe also some advice that you might have for people who are here today and thinking about becoming their own boss. So those kind of 2 big pieces.
I can relate to what Jake said about being uncomfortable. And beyond just when I started my business, even before that, from a career perspective, for me, and everybody's different, a little bit of uncomfort is important, and that keeps me on my toes, because it keeps me learning. It keeps me searching out, meeting different people to get advice. When I start to get comfortable, I start to say, what am I going to do next? What am I missing? So for me, that's kind of internal gauge. Of course, I do all the education and I do a lot of reading, and, you know, in my work that I do, I stay up to speed that way, which is a norm. But that uncomfort is a really important thing for me, just from a career perspective. And not that I live into so many plans. And like I said, I didn't have a 5-year plan, but I don't just plan financially what's going to happen every year. I plan how things are going to happen differently. So I spend time not just looking at, you know, how my sales are going to grow and what my P&L is going to look like, but how will I do things differently and do things better for the year? So I think that really, in December, I take time and I do it. I'm intentional about doing that. And then I start the year off really fresh with that. So it's not rocket science, but I think sometimes you can get so caught up when running a new business that you forget that it's really important to take some time and do that. So.
Absolutely. I appreciate that so much. And then I know I was going to say, Janet, I see you all the time posting things on LinkedIn too. So I think the other part of it is like your education, sharing education, which I appreciate. So thank you so much for that.
No worries.
Okay. So Jake, what about you? Maybe how do you stay on top of current trends in your industry, and what advice you might have for others?
So I'm a system engineer. So lists, I love lists. Routine, love routines, and like constant continuous improvement. That's my jam. So that's simple. What I talk to my staff about is being the best version of yourself. And part of that, we call this Tome Pro, is our company name, Tome. And like we say, if you want to be Tome Pro, we call this the say-do ratio. It's a ratio of what you say versus what you do. And that better be good, because it's really easy to say yes to anything. It's really hard to say no. And if your say-do ratio in life, in business, in sports, you know, friends, whatever, if it's off, you cannot be successful with a poor say-do ratio.
I've never heard that, but it summarizes so many things that I've thought of before, and that's awesome. So I'm guessing that would be your advice also to the audience or the attendees today.
One quick adder is always say yes, though, to Ohio University and Bobcats, even if they're asking for money or time or whatever. It's Bobcat Nation. You got to support that. That's always yes.
Well, thank you, Jake. I appreciate you saying that. I didn't make him say that, anybody, but yeah, and I appreciate, you never know with the Bobcat community too. You might end up on a panel just by being a Bobcat, right? Say yes to being on panels. Oh, Janice in the chat, please say that ratio again, the say-do ratio, right?
If you're an engineer or a scientist, you're like, it's actually the do-say ratio, because what you do versus what you say, but it just sounds better if you say say-do ratio. So we stick with that.
I like that. I like that. Awesome. And then I muted myself. John, how about you? What are you doing to kind of keep up on current trends, and then maybe any advice that you have for our folks that are here today?
So I saw a question in the chat here from Tapash, who was a TA working with me. So one of the things I did this is not exactly to the question, but I taught as an adjunct at OU as I was getting my business started. That was one of the things I ended up doing for about 2.5 years. And that helped me to, when you teach, you have to make sure you know what you're talking about. So I had to read an intro it was organic chemistry for non-majors, so it wasn't real hard stuff, but I still had to make sure I knew all that stuff and presented it. It also got me a library card, which has been extremely helpful as I've tried to find answers to consultants' problems. And I mean, library card means all the chemistry journals are available, you know, from my house. I can download any article, and I still use that. Keeping current is, each client brings me a new problem, you know, a new project. And so I learn by default, what are people putting their money into developing in terms of new drug therapies. Not all of them strike me as the most brilliant ideas, but I do what I can to help them out. And sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised at just how well this thing turns out that I thought wasn't very well thought out in the first place. So that's so keeping up is not a difficult thing. I'm sorry, I might have forgotten what the rest of the question
No,
was.
that's great.
Okay.
Just one more question for you, John, like any advice that you might have to people who are in the room. Obviously, yes, please everyone keep up to date on your trends. And I love the idea of, yeah, we do have a wonderful advantage being at OU. But what are some other advice pieces that you might have for attendees in the room who are thinking about becoming their own boss?
Yeah, so for this, I sat down yesterday and tried to make a list of things, and I'm afraid the list got longer than what we might have time for here. So I'll try to hit some highlights. One is to know that 80%, they say 80% of small businesses fail. And basically don't reinvent the wheel. Whatever you're trying to do, somebody's done it, and somebody may have written a book on how to do it and what to do and not do. Go find the, you know, Small Businesses for Dummies or whatever book will guide you through these things. There's a lot at stake, as somebody mentioned. You know, you got to survive till this thing takes off. So you could be dumping your life savings into what might be a poorly thought out idea. People do it all the time. They open restaurants, and you know, they work their butt off for 2 years, but you know, and then they close up shop. And when I see that, I always wonder, well, was that their life savings that just disappeared? So ask, as others have said, you know, ask for advice from as many people as you can. Understand that common reasons for failure, some of them are the idea itself was flawed, the demand for whatever you're trying to sell just simply doesn't justify the cost of producing it. This is common in, say, crafting businesses. I'm going to make these things and I'm going to sell them at trade shows. And well, when you figure it all up, it takes you 7 hours to make this thing. And if you pay yourself $25 an hour, it's going to cost, you know, $200, and people are willing to pay $10 for that item because they can buy it at Hobby Lobby for $8. You know, so you have to think about stuff like that. The idea was good, but the execution was underfunded. I'm going to open a coffee shop. To do it right takes $200,000. I've got $50,000, but I am so emotionally attached to this idea. I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to buy a place I can afford or rent a place I can afford. It's kind of off the beaten path. Nobody ever goes by here wanting to buy coffee, but I'm going to put it there because that's what I can afford. I'm going to have 2 people working there when I need 5 people to provide good service, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't a bad idea, but it was underfunded and it failed as a result. Another one is what we talked about. It was a great idea. The person just couldn't hang in there long enough until it took off. Do you really want to run a business? Or do you just want to make lasagna? I love making lasagna, so I'm going to have a restaurant. Well, running a restaurant's very different from making a beautiful tray of lasagna. So you have to really think about what you like to do, what you don't like to do. Are you going to get a partner to do the things you don't like to do or aren't particularly good at? If you form a partnership, think very carefully about your exit from the partnership. I was advised, think more carefully about your exit from the partnership than your entrance into the partnership, because if things don't work out, you want to be able to get out, with your, what ought to be yours, and not have it all, oops, they own it now, or something like that. So there's lots of things, but get a book on whatever it is you're trying to do, because people have already thought about this stuff.
I love that too. Like, you're not in this alone, right? Like, there are people out there who you can talk to, or that you can read their materials to kind of help support you.
one other thing that's specific to consulting, whatever you made at your last job, figure out by the hour what you were making. And I would say triple that. And that's what you should charge people, because your salary didn't include your benefits. So when you're on your own, you got to provide your own health insurance, dental, vision, life insurance, retirement savings, and so on. And set your prices high. You can always go down, but if you get a client on board with a low price, you say, I'm going to set it a little lower to get some. You might want to do that with your first client, but soon you should be charging what you really want to get, because it's very awkward to go back to a client with whom you have a pretty personal relationship and say, hey, can we raise the price? So don't underestimate what you should charge. And in the consulting world, people are charging ridiculous amounts of money. So don't be afraid to charge what you're worth.
Thank you,
Add
John.
something to what John said. When it comes to like businesses, there's an adage that I learned when I was working in a big company that a sale's not a sale, the money's in the bank. And as an employee, that doesn't really hit you because you're getting paid every 2 weeks. But when it's your business, and like people say, hey, I had this great meeting with Ford or GM up here in Michigan. It's like, good job, like good way to go. It's good. But until you get a purchase order, you don't have an order. Until you get paid, it's not a sale. So as we do really well. I'm knocking on wood here, but like we do really well. But I'll tell you that as a consultant, and I've spent some time on being 1099, you don't always get paid right away. Usually you get paid something, but that's part of it as well. And when you think about what your time is worth, ultimately it's only worth what someone's going to pay you, not what they're going to say.
Yep.
There's several questions in here, and I'm going to kind of combine two really quickly. Jake, I'm going to shoot this one to you really quickly. So we had two questions that came in, one from a student or one from a recent grad who was asking a little bit more about how you came up with the ideas and what methodology you used. But we also had another question come in about where did you obtain the capital for your startup? So if you could maybe hit on those a little bit.
Yeah, I've always felt that ideas are worthless. It's problems that are valuable and how you execute solutions to those problems. So, and again, being very dramatic with that line, but it's not about coming up with great ideas. It's about solving people's problems, and people will pay you. And the problem has to be painful enough that someone's willing to pay to solve it. AOL Instant Messenger was one of the greatest tech products in the history of all mankind. It was in every computer on Athens campus, and nobody made any money doing it. So it's not a business. And then funding, I would say that like from a funding perspective about like how you go about that is you have to be successful and get market traction in order to get funding. The exception to that is friends and family, and really it's close friends and close affluent rich family. And my dad gave me my first check, and we stretched that as far as we can take it. And my first time going to CES in Las Vegas, I was staying in a really shady, like $100 cash night condo and packing lunches. And that's what you have to do. And like, once you can show how you handle your money and your time and you're investing it, then other people will then put their money in. But it's tough. It is really a tough putt. And I mean, there's great ways to get incubated and get started now that weren't there when I was doing it, but it's not ever going to be easy. And it shouldn't be. I mean, it should be challenging, and it should be hard for you to get that. And you got to prove it. So my advice is, when you get customer orders, you win. And there's another adage, I'll throw a line on this, is that if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money.
Okay. Wow. Haven't heard that one. Janet, did you want, I know that you sit on a board that kind of works with some of this. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
I was just going to tag on to what Jake said. And I think, if you're not used to raising money and, trying to get investors, I think it's important. And I think somebody put in the chat, how do you find a business mentor? That's a fantastic thing to do before you start looking for money. Because the balance with somebody investing in your company is, what are you giving up? What are you gaining? Of course, but you want to be well versed in deals and what you're giving up to get that investment. And that's, I mean, that's a whole other panel probably that we could do. But I think it's an important key to raising money. You need to show your success, and you need to show that there's a problem that you're going to solve and fill in the market. But once you do that, you want to make sure that you're protecting your interest too.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all. I did see another chat just popped in there for panelists only. And if you would like to maybe direct message that person, that would be great. But due to our time sensitivity, I'm just really quickly going to ask Barb to share her screen and talk through a few resources with people for our attendees, just so that you kind of know how OU can help as well. So in the chat, I did drop in the link for the Center for Entrepreneurship, as well as the Innovation Center on campus. So some areas for you to kind of explore as well, if this is an area that you're really actively looking and pursuing some advice or some financial support. So we do have the Bobcat Network additionally. So for the person who asked specifically about a mentor, this is a Bobcat only, basically like a LinkedIn essentially for Bobcats. So it's bobcatnetwork.ohio.edu. And you are able to access that as an alumni, and you can join and connect with other Bobcats in your field. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you are looking to build your support network and your support system, especially within your Bobcat family. Additionally, I know that somebody put in the chat a little bit about the SBDC, which offers free consulting for your small business. Additionally, the Career and Leadership Development Center on campus does offer career coaching and events that are open to our alumni. So if you're looking for a little bit of like, maybe some of that narrowing down your industry, your interests, or how do you kind of get started, somebody to kind of talk through that a little bit. The Career and Leadership Development Center is definitely available to you, as well as if you are looking to recruit people for your company, they do help facilitate events where you can hire students, or if you're looking for a job, you can attend. And then last but not least, we are always doing a lot of different programming and events in the Alumni Association. And one of our big ones coming up is that this Friday it's next Friday, sorry. Next Friday, we have the Celebrate Women Conference. So it is not just available to women or people who identify as women. So if you are interested in attending, there's a lot of really wonderful, great speeches and talks that are going to be given that day. So we definitely encourage you to check that out. The Celebrate Women Conference. So with that being said, there's always a lot going on for our Bobcats, and I just want to take a moment on that note to thank our panelists for being here today. We know how busy you all are, and especially taking away time from your companies. We really, really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with us here. So thank you so much for all that you do for the Bobcat community, and thank you to all of our attendees as well for being here. I appreciate you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Yep.